urban regeneration strategy that we have in our manifesto to breathe life into the city centre. I think, of course, you can do things in other areas too, but in particular, the urban city centre, our heritage asset, is underdeveloped and not sufficiently regenerated. So it's a hand-in-hand policy that cuts across all different aspects.
Did I hear correctly today? Are there no tax breaks for companies that invest their own money in their own development?
No, there are tax breaks already if you refurbish certain properties. What we're talking about is having greater tax breaks and providing soft loans, which is something that is an idea in our manifesto, which goes in under our urban regeneration.
And how are you going to pay for that?
Well, we would pay for it. We've costed, by the way, all our ideas in our manifesto, and this is something that we are keen to explain during the election campaign, and not just about business, but we were told not to stray into the borrowing issue, so I'm keen not to do that, but I can assure you that we have done a very careful costing of all the ideas in our manifesto, and it may be that other parties are not in the same position, but we will critically look at the manifestos once they're published, and we'll carry out our own judgment of that.
I'm surprised.
When are they being published?
I mean, certainly, our manifesto has been carefully costed.
Well, I haven't seen it, that's why I've said.
Well, I haven't seen yours either.
Well, exactly.
Ours has gone to the printers.
No, don't bicker,
guys.
Ours has gone to the printers.
Right.
We'll deliver it as soon.
You're the one who's bickered twice. Have you noticed? You're the two
that's because I'm in the
involved.
middle.
Oh, I see. Right.
I'm the pig
That's
in the
fair
middle.
enough.
That's more of a comment on my weight than anything else.
Thanks for the rents and rates question. Who's next? Anybody with a burning question to man waving a white sheet of paper, always guaranteed to catch my eye. Here comes Craig.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
This is not just to try and find the scope, the size of the new entrant into the market, but very keen to hear more about the banking question or the initiative. First of all, I'd like to have a figure, actually, of commitment as to what sort of capital will be committed to such a venture in the small and medium business from the three participants this evening. And secondly, I think it's also been mentioned that one of the initiatives might be to go into the Gibraltar Savings Bank as an option. When you lend money, there's always a massive risk of not getting it back. How do you protect the savers when you put into the Gibraltar Savings Bank? Thank you.
Well, certainly the GSD's proposal for a... is it all right if I start,
yeah,
Frank? Certainly the GSD's proposal for a bank does not involve using pensioner debentures to lend out on speculative commercial lending. It involves the government itself employing a degree of capital to do that at government risk and not at government debenture holder risk. The government's preference is not for a fully government capitalized and government managed and government owned bank. The government, and this is why it's taken longer to set up, and I'm exposed to Fabian's reminders that it hasn't yet been done. The government's preference is very much for government participation, but in what is a Gibraltarian capital, Gibraltarian businessman, Gibraltarian owned and run bank, in which the government would have at best a minority stake. The study that has been done and the business model that has been so far generated by the government for these purposes suggests that such a bank would need a starting capital, a starting working capital of between 25 and 35 million pounds. And it's got to do not just business lending. One of the things in our manifesto is that we've got to find a way of, to kickstart our local property market, we've got to find a way of some sort of way of the same sort, some sort of government-inspired way of getting mortgages to first-time home buyers. And I think this bank would also provide, and indeed even before this bank is available, the government has already publicly said that it would provide either mortgages or mortgage guarantee to local first-time home buyers, as opposed in order to kickstart the market. You all know that if first-time home buyers can't buy, the rest of the property market doesn't move because it's all a domino chain of buyer and purchaser. The great problem for Gibraltar is that we have a successful and prosperous economy, and it is not being lent to because decisions are being made in head offices in London and in other capital cities around the world in which we are excluded, which do not reflect supply and demand and borrower covenants in Gibraltar, but which are nevertheless being made globally for the banks. And we've got to have at least one financial institution in Gibraltar that makes lending decisions in Gibraltar, for Gibraltar, with Gibraltar decision makers, real decision makers, on its board of directors.
I think there is you're absolutely right. The bank needs a solvency ratio. There are capitalization requirements that are in the legislation. These are constantly being reviewed, but because of the impact of European directives, but the extent of capital that a PDP government would be prepared to contribute is something that really depends on market interest, because our preference, very much like Peter has explained, our preference is that the government doesn't just set up a new bank in itself, but that we find a private sector partner or partners from the international banking community, but who might be prepared to take a stake with the government of Gibraltar as well to facilitate it, because they could contribute expertise and so on. But let me be very clear. Our initial work on this and soundings is that a retail bank capitalized with the assistance of the government will be a profit-making entity. And so this is not going to be a risky venture. Remember that at the current moment, we've only got, in effect, 2.5 retail banks in Gibraltar. We used to have many more that provided retail services, but of course people have moved into private client banking, which is more lucrative. I remember having discussions when I was in the DTI with bankers who were pulling out of retail banking in Gibraltar, not because it was unprofitable, but because of head office instructions, and notwithstanding the fact that they were profitable in Gibraltar. So I'm quite clear that in fact there is room in Gibraltar for another bank, a retail bank, providing services to home buyers and to small and medium enterprise in Gibraltar that could be run as a profit-making entity without increasing the net debt of Gibraltar.
Thank you. Let's try and keep it moving. The answers are getting a little long, gentlemen. And
Thank you.
Perhaps you could sort of wrap it, and because there are a lot of subjects that we need to get through, and we've only got...
Carlos, thanks for the question. I think it's important that we understand what the government did in respect to the Gibraltar Savings Bank. It removed, as you know, the requirement for the bank to have the 10% of capital that it had in respect of the amounts of savings. So £17 million that was in the Gibraltar Savings Bank, or was provided for the Gibraltar Savings Bank, was taken out of the balance sheet recently, I think 2 years ago. Now, what we're saying is that we would use the Gibraltar Savings Bank as the retail bank for Gibraltar. We would return to it the 10% solvency ratio. We think that the figure is pretty much in the region that Peter's referred to, 20 to 25 million pounds that's necessary to capitalize that bank in order to enable it to do the sort of retail business that we think it should be doing. It shouldn't be doing a lot of lending, it should be guaranteeing small business loans. I don't necessarily think that it should be giving mortgages. I think that there are banking institutions in Gibraltar that are giving mortgages to the right developments, and if we develop for co-ownership, the best covenant in town is the government of Gibraltar. And if a lender goes to one of the existing high street banks and says that he only needs to pay for 50% of the property that he's buying, and the government of Gibraltar is buying the other 50%, then you as a banker would not be exposed to 100% risk on a particular property. So I don't think that the new Gibraltar Bank necessarily needs to go there.
And realistic, the next 5 years, the next administration?
Well, I think all of us would say it is, otherwise we wouldn't be putting it in our manifesto.
Yeah, but I mean, is it pie in the sky?
I don't think it is.
You know, we've heard some hugely ambitious plans today, and you're all saying it's costed. I'm not convinced. I've never read a manifesto that's costed.
Frank, this community has shown that it has the ability to keep going forward, whoever is in government, and that we are able to deliver economic growth. We're a nation of traders. We always do well. I'm sure that whoever wins the election, we will prosper, and we will deliver on these manifesto commitments that we are entering into.
With a new bank?
Well, in part with a new bank and all the other commitments that we're entering into.
Right. Okay. Next question, please. I see not a huge forest of hands, actually. Does that mean you're all satisfied with all the answers?
Well, let's go to the Angry Fire for a drink, then.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Right, okay. Well, there is a gentleman at the back, just next to the microphone, actually. very conveniently.
Yeah.
Good evening.
You've all outlined different, albeit relatively similar, promises to facilitate the startup of businesses, improve the infrastructure, this bank. However, I would like to highlight the issue of education. I mean, what steps will you take to educate and encourage students to, in secondary education to follow their potential entrepreneurial flair? This encouragement, of course, will improve employment, local employment. I mean, do you have any guarantees for any of us students wanting to become entrepreneurs, you know, teach us something or two?
We can I take that first? We
Sure.
issued a very big commitment yesterday on education, employment and skills. We see this as a very interrelated area. And it's not just about our school standards, but it's also about vocational training, and it's about careers guidance. And one of the things I think would be important that highlights and tackles the issue that you raise is that we think it's important for the education and employment departments to work with the business and private sector to guide our students more particularly in the skills that would be available and the jobs that would be available in the market, because we don't think that that is being done sufficiently, and it leads perhaps to too many professionals in one area, too few in another. And
Which areas are oversubscribed?
well, I mean, you know, the three lawyers here, and here we go.
Okay. That goes without saying. What about apart from law?
No, but
you know.
there are niche areas, for example, in financial services, in funds, in insurance, where we should be training more people. There are areas in tourism where we should be training, and hotel and catering. There are areas in business where we should be guiding people to be precisely more innovative in business. We could do a bit more about. There is, I know, a scheme in the education department, because it gets coverage on television from time to time, about trying to foster that kind of innovative skills, inventive skills. But we should probably do a bit more formal work in conjunction with the employment department to guide our young people a bit better.
Well,
Fabian.
I think that the young entrepreneur scheme that is presently running in the schools is absolutely fabulous. I know that it's enjoyed the support of all three of the political parties. We particularly bought some chips from the guys who won the competition last year, and it's been privately funded. And I think it's fantastic that we've got philanthropists in Gibraltar who are prepared to make that investment in our young people and in their entrepreneurial skills. I think the government has to be there too. This space cannot just be occupied by a private philanthropic organization. I know that the government contributes already through the schools and allowing the infrastructure of the schools to be used for these purposes. I think it's important that we continue to ensure that that happens, and if the government has to pick up a bit of the slack, so be it. I don't think your question was directed at how we make people who are going through the education system aware of what jobs there are in the future in the labour market, but I think it's right to say that those two must be connected. I interpreted your question to be more about entrepreneurship and how we create a culture of entrepreneurship already in the schools. And I think that's fundamentally important, because our young people today need to see themselves as generators of wealth. And I think many of those who are in the comprehensive schools, in what you and I, well, at least what I used to call the 5th and 6th form, have that bug, and what we have to do is ensure that it grows.
So they should be doing business studies and economics at
Well, I don't,
16.
not just that. I think that this scheme that's ongoing now makes them think about how to run a company. It's a little bit like The Apprentice, but in school, and they run their own companies, and they compete with people in the United Kingdom, and we're very proud of how well they've done in the past, and I'm sure they will do in the future. I had some guys who wanted to come and see me about green initiatives, and even though it's the middle of the election campaign, I saw them yesterday, because I think it's fantastic that we have young kids who are interested in these things, and we have to give them the time.
Right, we have this dynamic where we've obviously got the incumbent acting chief minister and the two would-be chief ministers. So I don't want it to turn into attacking what the government has or hasn't done in the past. But my attention was drawn yesterday on this subject to the Trade Licensing Act, which is seen by the business community as rather protectionist and runs against fostering new business initiatives. And I was given the example of somebody from Gibraltar who came, I think, second in the UK Young Enterprise Scheme, intending to market MP3 players, basically, that cost £10, described as the equivalent of a trip around the rock. And for complicated reasons involving the Trade Licensing Act, they were unable to find premises, unable to start up, and a great idea was scotched at birth.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I don't think the government is in the business, should be in the business of guaranteeing business success and guaranteeing jobs. For government, read taxpayer, guaranteed jobs mean unnecessary additional burden on taxpayers. I think the job of government is to create the political stability and the environment in which private sector business can prosper and creates real jobs, and then the government should focus on equipping our own people to win those jobs in the jobs market. For those young people who want to go into business, and I hope many of them will, rather than just aspire to jobs in the public sector, that is what we've got, our incubators and our business startups.
I was frustrated by the red tape and the protectionism of the existing law.
Well, it's precisely for ideas, for the very type of example that you have cited, that we think that the incubator and the business startup would cut through all of that and spare him or her the need to invest in huge amounts of peripheral premises, secretaries, receptionists, security, that sort of thing, which can be provided centrally in a managed space environment, and that would allow the person to invest what money he can and what time and effort he can in actually promoting the business idea, which for example, the one that you have said. The Trade Licensing Act is, of course, protectionist. It was intended to be protectionist. It was intended to protect a relatively closed economy from too many people coming in and making all the businesses unviable. Because, of course, in a small place, if you're a successful retailer in something, everybody else will come and want to open the same thing right next to you. It was designed to be protectionist. Initially against each other, in other words, that we shouldn't all be setting up businesses in competition with each other and making us all unviable. Then it became protectionists as against people coming in from abroad, mainly from Spain, to compete with us in our businesses, which is really the primary principal purpose that it seems to serve now. But look, if we have all grown out of this sort of protectionism, which we designed ourselves for ourselves, then I can't imagine that any government would object to eliminating that degree of protectionism, if indeed the business community feels that it can do without that degree of protection.
Okay. I think we have grown out of that degree, because you're absolutely right. It was historically relevant to construct a trade licensing regime that operated in that way, but of course it became less relevant as soon as there was accession into the European Union by Spain and Portugal as well, and then there are provisions that don't allow the discrimination between community nationals and community corporate entities and so on and so forth. And in this modern day and age, I think we need to facilitate business, and this is why we are committed to repealing it, but setting up a licensing regime that isn't as bureaucratic, so that people are out in the open, so that you can monitor it for illegal labor, unregistered business purposes, because it is a partnership with the Employment Ministry. But I think it would also facilitate, I mean, you wouldn't have the horror stories that you gave as an anecdote.
If I can just, Frank,
yep,
I think that the trade licensing has done a job already. There is still a job for it to do, but not the same job that it's been doing until now. In a globalized economy, we can control the number of shops there are in Main Street that sell sunglasses, but we can't stop people sitting at home and buying sunglasses from wherever they like, and then importing them and paying import duty when they come in through the post. So the issue is, how do we allow the Trade Licensing Authority to work in order to protect Gibraltarian businesses, whilst at the same time not stifling new Gibraltarian businesses in a globalized economy where everybody at home has the best shopping centre in the world just on their screen.
And has it stifled Gibraltarian businesses?
I think it has stifled some Gibraltarian businesses and protected others that have grown and prospered, and that's why we have the main street that we have today. It's a new world out there. We have to keep keen on these issues, and I don't think we can talk about just getting rid of trade licensing. I think trade licensing may have a new role in the modern world. We need to understand what it is. In the context of unfair competition and people coming in from Spain and working in Gibraltar, being unregistered, it may be that trade licensing has to become the source of registration and monitoring for those that come across the frontier, rather than the source of restrictive practices internally.
Thank you, gentlemen. Are we
Frank,
still running up?
I've got a question, actually, for the three leaders. I think it's fair to say that most of us here work for companies that feed directly or other off two main industries in Gibraltar, namely the financial services sector and the gaming industry. And I think the present administration deserves credit for that. However, do the three leaders and their parties have strategies to envisage the disappearance or one of these, which perhaps changes of legislation in foreign countries might result in? For example, the disappearance of the gaming industry. Is there a plan to diversify and spread our risk?
Well, I think nobody plans for complete catastrophe. Complete catastrophe may hit you, but I don't think anybody plans for it. So certainly we are not planning for the disappearance of the finance centre or for the disappearance of the gambling industry. But I agree with you that diversification is important, and indeed the gambling industry was itself in its day a diversification. So we should always be looking to add further strings to our bow. And I think one of the reasons why this economy and this society is as prosperous as it is that we have, for an economy that is so small, one that is so diversified. If you look at small country economies in the Caribbean and elsewhere, one of the things that typically characterizes them is undiversified economies, tourism and half a crop and a little bit of tourism. One of them goes pear-shaped in the international market, and they have no resilience. One of the reasons why we are relatively free from some of these syndromes is that for an economy which is relatively small, not to be sneezed at, £1 billion now, but still relatively small, it is extraordinarily diversified, and that is one of its strengths. I have mentioned here tonight one area which we have identified as a possible further string to the bow of our economy, and that is that the gaming industry has brought to Gibraltar activities, mainly online, mainly IT skills, whether it's in payment processing, whether it's in internet security, software, client processing. And I think that has given us an opportunity, using